Washington, D.C., October 1962. The air crackled with static, not from radios, but from fear. U-2 photos showed Soviet missiles in Cuba. Kennedy and Khrushchev exchanged letters like dueling pistols. And in a basement office at the State Department, 23-year-old Thomas Greene stared at a decrypted cable that made his hands shake. He was just a linguistics intern, hired for his fluency in Russian and knack for pattern recognition. His job: transcribe low-priority diplomatic traffic from Eastern Bloc embassies. Routine stuff. Or so he thought. But this message wasn't routine. It was marked, "Eyes Only, EXCOM, the executive committee handling the crisis." And it contained a single line. Final authorization for tactical deployment confirmed. Window, 72 hours. Thomas didn't know what tactical deployment meant. But he knew 72 hours was less than 3 days. And he knew someone who might understand. Professor Ivan Petrov taught Slavic linguistics at Georgetown. He was brilliant, chain-smoked Gauloise, and quoted Pushkin in perfect iambic tetrameter. He was also, as Thomas had recently learned from a hushed conversation in a faculty lounge, a Soviet asset. Not a spy in the Hollywood sense. No dead drops or cyanide pills. Just a man who, since the 1950s, had passed academic insights, and occasional State Department gossip, to handlers at the Soviet embassy. Thomas had stumbled on this by accident, a misdelivered envelope, a name he recognized. He said nothing. Now, holding the decrypted cable, he faced a choice. Report it to his supervisor, and risk triggering a purge that could destroy lives. Or warn Petrov, and risk accelerating the very war he feared. He chose the latter. Not out of loyalty. Out of hope. That night, Thomas met Petrov at a diner near DuPont Circle. Rain slicked the streets, jukebox played Sinatra. He slid a napkin across the table. On it, he'd written. "They know about the missiles. They're moving soon." Petrov read it, then lit a cigarette with steady hands. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. "I had to," Thomas replied. "I don't know who's right. But I know millions will die if this goes wrong." Petrov exhaled smoke. "And you think telling me helps?" "I think," Thomas said, "that maybe you can make them listen." The professor crushed the napkin in his fist. "Go home, Thomas. Forget you saw this." But neither of them forgot. Over the next 48 hours, Washington held its breath. Kennedy announced the blockade. Soviet ships approached the line. The world waited. Thomas returned to his desk, transcribing mundane cables about wheat shipments and cultural exchanges. But his mind raced. Had Petrov acted? Had he warned Moscow? Or had he used the information to strengthen the Soviet position? Then, on October 24, something shifted. Soviet ships slowed. Then stopped. Then turned back. No one knew why. Officially, it was Kennedy's firm stance. Unofficially, rumors swirled of back-channel talks. Thomas never asked. But that evening, he found a book on his desk, Dr. Zhivago, in Russian. Inside, a single underlined line. "The truth is always new." It was Petrov's way of saying, it worked. The crisis passed. Life resumed. But Thomas couldn't unsee what he'd done. He hadn't leaked secrets to the press. He hadn't joined the CIA. He'd simply given one man, a man on the other side, a chance to prevent catastrophe. Yet guilt gnawed at him. Was he a traitor? A peacemaker? Or just a fool who played with fire? He confronted Petrov weeks later. "Did you tell them?" The professor poured 2 glasses of cheap vodka. I told them the Americans knew everything. That any move would be met with overwhelming force. That Khrushchev's bluff was called. And they believed you. They believed you, Petrov said. Because only someone with access would know that phrase, tactical deployment. You gave them proof the US had penetrated their comms. That scared them more than missiles. Thomas sat in silence. His small act hadn't just warned, it had convinced. But consequences followed. In December, Thomas was quietly dismissed from his internship. Budget cuts, they said. No explanation. No accusation. Just a handshake and a box of his things. He suspected Petrov had been recalled, or worse. Yet in January 1963, he received a postcard from Prague. The snow here is clean. Come visit when the world forgets. IP. Thomas never went. But he kept the postcard pinned above his desk for years. He didn't know it yet, but his choice had saved more than lives. It had preserved a fragile thread of communication between enemies. And in a world balanced on the edge of annihilation, that thread was everything. Years passed. Thomas earned his Ph.D., taught linguistics at a small college in Vermont, married, had children. He never spoke of 1962. Not even to his wife. The world moved on, Vietnam, Watergate, détente. But every October, he'd reread that postcard from Prague and wonder, was it worth it? Then, in 1987, during Gorbachev's visit to Washington, he saw Petrov's name in a footnote of a declassified CIA memo. Soviet academic IP provided critical assessment during Cuban Missile Crisis, influencing Khrushchev's decision to withdraw. No details. No proof it was the same man. But Thomas knew. His professor hadn't just passed a message. He'd shaped history. That night, for the first time in decades, Thomas cried, not from guilt, but from relief. He hadn't chosen a side. He'd chosen humanity. In 1992, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Thomas received a package from Moscow. Inside, a worn copy of Dr. Zhivago, and a letter in shaky handwriting. Dear Thomas. They called me a traitor for believing peace was possible. You called me nothing, and gave me everything. The world never knew your name. But I did. Ivan. The letter was dated 1989. Ivan had died months before the wall fell. Thomas held the book to his chest. In the margin of the first page, in red pencil, Ivan had written. He didn't choose a side. He chose both. It became Thomas's epitaph, though no one would ever know. Thomas never returned to government work. But he began teaching a new course, Language and Moral Ambiguity. He told his students. Words aren't just sounds. They're choices. And sometimes, the right word at the right time can stop a war. He never mentioned Cuba. But his students sensed the weight behind his words. One asked, have you ever changed history? Thomas smiled. No. But I once helped 2 enemies remember they were human. Historians still debate what ended the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some credit Kennedy's resolve. Others, Khrushchev's pragmatism. A few whisper about back-channel academics who risked everything to keep lines open. But in declassified KGB archives, one file remains partially redacted. File #K 1962 Omega. Subject, Informant, Lingua, U.S. Academic Circle. Assessment, provided verifiable U.S. intelligence on ExComm deliberations. Credibility, high. No name. No photo. Just a codename, and a single line. Source acted not for ideology, but for prevention. Thomas Greene was never named. But his choice echoes in every crisis averted since. In 2005, Thomas donated his personal papers to Georgetown University. Among them, the napkin from the diner, preserved in plastic, the postcard from Prague, Ivan's letter. The archivist asked, "Should we restrict access?" Thomas shook his head. "Let anyone read it. Maybe someone else will face that choice someday. They should know they're not alone." He died in 2010. His obituary called him a beloved linguist and educator. It said nothing of October 1962. But in a quiet corner of the library, a student once found a note tucked inside a Russian grammar textbook. "When the world demands you pick a side, ask if there's a third. No signature. Just truth, left like a seed." Today, as nations again stand on the brink, over missiles, borders, ideologies, the story of Thomas Greene remains hidden in plain sight. He wasn't a spy. Not a hero. Just a young man who saw two paths to disaster and dared to walk between them. In a system that demanded loyalty, he chose empathy. In an age of absolutes, he embraced ambiguity. And in doing so, he proved that the most powerful act in a crisis isn't taking a stand, but creating space for others to step back from the edge. As he once wrote in his journal, "I didn't save the world. I just gave two old men a reason to listen. And sometimes, that's enough."